allow distribution or performance of derivative works, remixes or not. So you can apply, I don't want my work to be changed, or you can say like I want my work, or my work can also be changed and integrated in other works. And you have this share alike provision, which I showed in the example, where you basically say you can change it and remix the stuff under the condition that you make that available again. Which ends up, like if you take these three conditions, we end up with 6 different licenses, and they are presented here in the form of from the most liberal at the bottom to the most restrictive at the top. So the most liberal license we have is the attribution license, which basically says you can do whatever you want to do with that work as long as you give proper attribution. Then we have the attribution share alike, which I've just shown in that example. Then we have the attribution no derivatives, which basically says you can use it, but you can't change it, and you have to give attribution. Then we have the attribution non-commercial share alike, which says you can use it, but not in commercial context, and you can make works based on this work. You can make remixes of this work under the condition that you make these remixes available again under the same license. And then finally we have the attribution non-commercial no derivatives, which is basically a license that only allows the circulation of the work in the unchanged form for non-commercial purposes. So it's a little bit like you can give it to your friends, basically, is what this license says. Important things to note about the licenses is that they do not limit the fair use rights or the copyright exceptions, which I mentioned in the beginning. So even if something is licensed under the extremely restrictive license I mentioned at the end, that still means you can take quotations out of it, because that's a right granted to you by law, and it doesn't get like the license doesn't limit rights which are granted by law. They are non-exclusive and irrevocable. What does that mean? Non-exclusive means like you can license something under the Creative Commons license, but you can also like make separate licensing agreements with somebody else. Just because you give it away under a Creative Commons license doesn't mean that you can't also like sell the same material under different conditions under a different license. But they are irrevocable, means like once you apply the license, you can't change the license afterwards. Once something is licensed, you can't just take that back anymore. This is fairly technical. The CC licenser enters into a separate license agreement with each user, so it always constitutes a license agreement between me as the author and the user of that work. And they don't provide any warranties. So I license something, but you can't, that doesn't say anything about, for example, that this work provides or fulfills certain standards, or that information is true or anything. All these kind of things are kept outside of the licenses. And the licenses terminate immediately upon breach. So if you don't follow up on the license conditions as a user, then you don't have a license anymore. The license terminates, and then you haven't got permission to use that work. So in that case, you're infringing the copyright, and that is where the legal enforcement can stop in. So if somebody doesn't, for example, doesn't give attribution, but says I've got it under the Creative Commons license, then basically at that moment the Creative Commons license becomes invalid. The person doesn't have a license, and he or she can go to a court of law, or like at least approach in first instance the people using that work without permission, in order to ask them to stop that or change that or pay for that, or seek remedies in the legal system. I think I've talked quite long, and actually I'm not sure like how much time I've left, or if I've got time left. I've got a couple of examples, but maybe it's interesting more like to open the floor for questions or your thoughts about this at this moment, and then see if we want to go. But maybe anyway, are there questions regarding what I've just said? Because now it's going a little bit more into examples where the licenses are used.
When you were talking about the model of radio,
yeah.
radio everywhere, and but maybe this is a good model. And can you maybe talk about what you meant by that? Like,
there is, I mean.
What's the question?
The question is, like I mentioned in the beginning, I mentioned this thing about how radio deals with copyright, which basically has this moment where you don't have to, like a radio station doesn't have to go to all individual musicians and ask them for permissions every time they want to use a song on the radio, but they do this via collective licensing societies, so the GEMAs or Buma Stemra here or SACEM in France. And she asked, because I said that might also be a good idea for internet, she asked what did I mean by that? So this is probably something which mainly applies to music, but maybe also to films. We have this situation where like most of the music distributed on the internet is distributed outside of the official channels. Which is A, because it's convenient, B, because like the music industry for a very long time failed to provide official channels to legally download music. It's still most of the time complicated, and you don't find like record stores which have kind of like everything. And which results, of course, in a situation where a lot of the material is downloaded without permission, so also without payment, which of course is a detrimental situation to the artists who make this music and who should in some form or another be reimbursed for that. It doesn't really seem to work very well based on this permission culture that you have to like negotiate licenses if you want to use music on the internet, or provide the incentive, or sell songs on the internet in a record store. And so one could change the entire concept, very similar to what's happening with radio, to pay upfront a flat fee and then be allowed to listen to copy, to distribute everything. So one of the ideas being forwarded in this discussion is basically an internet levy that, for example, and these are like example amounts, you pay with your internet connection €5 more for every internet connection every month. And that gives you the right to download everything and to use everything. And this stuff, the money you pay, doesn't go to your internet service provider, but goes to some form of organization which then distributes it among all the artists whose music is being downloaded, shared on the internet. Which is very similar, which could again be one of these collecting societies who do that for radio as well. Radio also pays a flat fee to these collecting societies, and the collecting societies then distribute it among musicians or composers along the ratio of how often their music is played on the radio stations, how often it's played in bars and such things. Does that answer your question? So this is more in the discussion, okay, how can musicians actually make a living in times where most of the music is basically accessible for free on the internet? Of course, this then also goes quickly into the question if this should be also the case for other forms of creative production, for example, movies, but maybe also writing, e-books, these kind of things. So it is probably like, it seems to be one of the very few models where you could be sure that people actually get money. On the other hand, it is an extremely complex thing to manage in a way, because you need to you probably need to record what people download with all the privacy implications that has. So in order how to distribute that money fairly, then that isn't really well thought out at the moment. So just going into a couple of examples, this actually is not such a good example, but this again illustrates the point. The screenshot I made just before the thing illustrates the point that there's extreme amounts of photos available on Flickr. If you look there, this is the page of Flickr where they list all their, basically, which provides an entry to all their Creative Commons license pictures on that thing. And if you look alone under this attribution non-commercial share alike license, there's 23,815,278 pictures available as of this morning. Now it's probably by the magnitude of 5,000 more already in the meantime. And you see, like other licenses, the license mentioned above has 11 million, that license has 6 million. So, and you can go to this part of the Flickr page, and if you click on that see more, you get to a page which basically provides you with a search engine which searches within Flickr, but then only within the images which fall under this specific license. So this is actually a fairly valuable tool to get images, to get pictures which you can freely use for